Reverend Vosper, first of all, thank you for taking the time to speak with me this morning. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Now, you're known across Canada and around the world now as the atheist pastor. I've somewhat followed your story over the last few years. It's intriguing, to say the least. And if I'm completely honest, I'm a little confused at times by it. But that's why we wanted to speak with you, get some questions answered from you today. I'm an ordained minister, too. Mm-hmm. And I can imagine how things would have gone if I stood before my ordination examining council and I started with, I don't believe in God. Can you, in like 60 seconds or so, explain what your stance, what your belief in God is?
Yeah, sure I can. My understanding of God, which was originated in my childhood in Sunday school and was honed during my theological education, is non-theistic. I don't have an understanding of the kind of God that most people on the street would think God is. So a traditional understanding. I had come to understand God more as what we have the responsibility to create between us, which is something that is love and respect and builds right relationship. But I learned that understanding was not what people heard, and I wanted to be understood when I spoke, so I stopped using that word.
When did you stop using that word then?
Probably around 2003, 2004. We stopped using that word in our services and the name God in our services. And over the course of the years since then, we have developed a very secular language in our gatherings.
So what about your view on Jesus then?
As many liberal clergy in the United Church of Canada and other liberal denominations, my understanding of Jesus is that he was a man with a group of people who aligned themselves with his interests and desires. He inspired them, and when he died, that work that he had done could not be stopped. I mean, people needed to have that sort of passion for life, for one another, to break down barriers, to come together around the values that they wanted to see lived out in the world, and that story was augmented over the generations as between when Jesus lived and when the Gospels were written. And so we have been handed a picture which in some cases is very detrimental to human relationships. In many cases, it's also what gives us life and allows us to look at one another and find love in each other and beauty in each other's lives.
So you do, I'm hearing then you would not believe in the literal and physical resurrection of Jesus then?
No, I wouldn't.
No. What parts of the story do you find detrimental to human relationships? You mentioned that. I'm curious. Yeah.
Well, I think some of the condemnatory passages that create division and privilege, the understanding that, the Great Commission in Matthew, I think is a very detrimental story to others in our world. When we go forward and say we have the right to claim this and that and the other thing, and that you don't have access to it because A, you're not a believer, or B, you're not baptized, or C, you have fallen away from the true faith, or D, you believe in something else, then we can overcome you because we have the right hand of God. And I think that that's very problematic and has been problematic down through the history of our world since religion itself has been created, not just Christianity. And religion, I believe, was developed to protect us, and it has done an incredible job of doing that. But I don't think that right now we can afford that. So what our community does, we get underneath those beliefs. So there are people in my community who are traditional Christians.
Okay.
There are people who are not, but we're looking for what is the base. What is the basis for how we need to be together as human beings?
And so you're, I'm also hearing then you obviously don't think the Bible is infallible, right? And the living, breathing Word of God, it's more of a human construct. Am I hearing you correctly then?
That would be what I was taught in my theological education. We were given the tools of critical inquiry, and we were asked to explore that text with those. And when you do that, and my congregation had been doing that for about 15 years before I even got there. When you do that, you end up with a very human story that was written for very particular reasons. And some of them we can glean from the text, and some of them we will never know. But we have to interact with that text and realize that those people who wrote it, for many of them, it was a text that was defining the world and responding to the world that they were in. So this is how things are. I'm going to address it this way. And I think that there was a lot of desire to create right relationship in that text, but it doesn't work predominantly in the 21st century.
Why do you feel it doesn't work in the 21st century?
Well, for some of the divisive reasons that I mentioned before, some of the persecutions that we continue that around the world, around that are related to sexuality and gender, and the ongoing gender challenges that we have known. I think that there are, we have destroyed whole cultures in our effort to make this story the prime narrative. And I think that it is, like every religion, it is wrapped around human needs and human desires, and we can extricate those and address those and be real about those without some of the lexicon, some of the language of faith.
I hope this is a fair question. I'm just curious, as you were speaking, do you think that maybe humanity would have been better off without the Holy Bible or other holy books and other religious texts?
The concept of hell has only ever been created by religion. And that concept has made us a fearful people over the course of our history. If we could eradicate the concept of hell and eradicate the concept of a privileged afterlife, I think our story would be very different, and I think that we would have, obviously, the great, eradications of people would not have happened. I think that if we could eradicate those two concepts, which only exist in religious denominations and faith traditions, if those faith traditions were free of those two things, heaven and hell, I think we would have walked a very different path.
I just preached on Revelation 20 at a church this past Sunday, and I was reminded, to me, that hell is a real place, right? So, but
right.
To you would disagree, obviously.
Yeah, I do.
So
Probably.
in 2015, the United Church of Canada, they made a requirement that its clergy be in ongoing affirmation of their ordination questions. It's there where things you started to get in trouble. Is that correct? Yes,
that piece of polity was created in order to address the fact that I identify as an atheist. So if I could just say for a moment why I identified in that way.
Yeah, for sure.
I had been clear that I did not believe in God since 2004 when I founded the Canadian Centre for Progressive Christianity. In my book that was published in 2008 and was a bestseller, I identified as a non-theist. My second book in 2012, I identified as a theological non-realist, which is really, big language for atheist. And then in 2013, I came out as an atheist, and that was in solidarity with Bangladesh secular bloggers who had been arrested following the murder of another blogger, and they had been arrested and were being threatened with execution. And Fazil Say, who is an internationally renowned pianist in Turkey, had said on Facebook that he was an atheist and had been arrested and sentenced to 10 months in prison in Turkey. So with these things happening around the world and continuing to happen, it seemed to me that it was important for me to stand in solidarity. And as one of our correspondents said, really basically I said was, if you're going to target those people, I have a target on me here too. And I am not going to stand by and not identify using a label that others are using and being, and in fact, the bloggers in Bangladesh weren't using that label. They were given that label as a way to raise vitriol against them. So I took it on as an act of solidarity, and that my denomination has taught me to do as well. So not only did they educate me about the Bible, which the questions about which will lead you to a very different understanding of faith than many have in more traditional and more conservative iterations of that faith, they also teach you to stand in solidarity with those who are on the margins. I'm just going to stop right there. Are you getting cut out where I'm beeping?
No, I'm not, actually. You're clear,
right.
yeah.
Okay, that's great.
And I just thinking, well, this is 10 minutes now, and I promise you 10 minutes, but I could talk to you for hours. Do you have another 10 minutes or so?
Sure, fine.
Okay,
yeah, absolutely.
One of the things that, I will have a very different stance on you in the end, but the one thing I really do appreciate about you is you make me think, and I appreciate that, right? Like, you make me think about my own faith and what I believe, and you challenge me. And I certainly hope that other Christians are at least doing that when they hear your story.
Thank you, Mike. If I could just speak to that.
Yeah.
I know people and have had family members who are deeply committed Christians, and they have used, those who I know and love have often used their faith to make the world a better place. And I love that. Faith doesn't get in the way of the ability to do that. And so my first book, which was titled With or Without God, How the Way We Live is More Important, Why the Way We Live is More Important Than What We Believe, that was specifically titled that because I did not want it picked up by people who had a conservative faith, which would be threatened by that book. Yeah. So, if your faith is strong and you are using your faith to shine light into the world and to be loving and to share the same kind of values that I share, I celebrate that faith. But I will stand in the way if you're going to use your faith to deny people rights or to denigrate people or to make people fearful about what's happening, what the choices that they're making in their lives. So that's where I come from.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm imagining the last 3.5 years has not been easy for you too. What has it been like for you and your congregation as you've you've battled against the denomination, right, and others to remain as an ordained minister in your local congregation? What's it been like for you in the church?
It has been a very trying time. We have been doing what we do to the best of our abilities, and what we do is we gather together on Sundays, like everybody else does in the Christian church, and we uplift the values by which we choose to live. And so, our congregation, unlike many congregations, does not have a single clique or anyone in it who would backbite somebody else. And sometimes I think of that as recreational stress in congregational settings, that's where people get that bit of energy. But we have a very strong congregation who is, and they are devoted to the values that we have placed at the center of our work, many of which have been distilled from Christianity, but there are people there who have come from a variety of different traditions. So getting through this 3.5 years has been hard. It's been hard on us, but we have continued to do that work, and it never for a moment made us feel that this was not important work. Like, one of the things that we're seeing happen in Canada and is happening in most Western countries where religion has been a significant depository for social capital, and by that I mean Christian churches across the country, across Canada, those are the people who are in church, who have the connections, who have the multiple interactions with one another throughout the week. Those people have a much higher level of subjective well-being than people who are not involved in religion. And so they are the people who are volunteering in your hospitals and art galleries and student councils and, clean up the riverbanks and the spring projects. They are the people who are donating to charities in about 5 or 6 times what people who are not involved in religion are doing. and they are the people who go out and vote consistently. And that is the group of people that is falling off a cliff in Canada. In our and it's across all Christian denominations. There may be some bright lights of huge churches, but numerically we're falling off the ledge. And as those in liberal denominations age, and that's obvious. I'm not going to pretend that we're doing well.
Right.
That trajectory is going to fall off the cliff in 10 to 20 years. So what do we do about our country? What do we do about the social democracy that we have? What do we do about trying to care for one another? And that's the piece of work that we've been doing at West Hill. We want to create communities, and we did launch a community in downtown Toronto called the Toronto Oasis. We want to launch and support and nurture communities that bring people together who don't want to gather around the language of Christian faith, whether they are believers or not.
Okay, because I think that's probably one of the biggest questions that my audience has is why, if you don't believe in God, why fight so hard the last 3.5 years to be a minister in a religion that puts God at the center of it? Why not just be a social worker or start a social club or something else like that, right?
Okay, and that's an excellent question, and that's what I'm answering.
Yeah.
Because I'm saying my denomination, which has been on the forefront of justice issues, has continually, in my opinion, held the Bible accountable to love rather than the other way around. It is, as far as I was concerned, the only denomination in the world that could take that step and invite those who are outside of the church to create church-like communities. Church-like communities are essential to well-being, and if we lose that, we are at risk of losing much. I mean, already charitable donations have dropped incredibly over the last 10 years, and so we assume that our kids are going to have people, running scouts and guides, and we assume that we're going to have volunteers in the hospital who will help us find our way to where we're supposed to be, and we assume that we will have a committee of committed volunteers who will help raise funds so that we can have a local symphony orchestra. All of that is at risk, and that's where I am most deeply concerned. It's not just about the living out of values. It's about losing a sense of community, and I think that is a tragic consequence that's coming down the pipe.
I imagine over the last 3.5 years, you've heard a lot of things that maybe are hard to hear about you, and accusations and things like that. One thing I've seen consistently the last 2 days, a lot of Christians have said that you're a wolf in sheep's clothing. That comes from Matthew 7:15. Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. What's your response to that accusation?
Yeah, I hear that and I see that, and of course it's troubling to me. And again, we're getting back to the divisive nature of religion. My understanding of Christianity has challenged me to live my life according to the values that were embedded in that tradition. And yes, there are values that create division, that deny rights, and that label. Those aren't the values that I think are the ones within the Christian tradition and many other great faith traditions that will help us going forward. I am not a false prophet, because my prophecy has nothing to do with turning people away from anything. If someone uses their faith in ways, as I've said, that are life-giving, that lift up and hallow and point to beauty, I just as much as anyone else want that to happen. I do not, and I don't want to tear someone's faith away from them in any way, as long as they are celebrating it in a way that, you know, enlivens love, that engenders right relationship, that it takes place with respect, and you know. So I think, you know, I understand that. I can get where people are, but I would call them back to some of the other elements of Christianity, which challenged us. You know, Jesus challenged us to see beyond differences and to see beyond labels. And I believe that that is a core element of the gospel message, and one that I carry within me.
I will be fair, and in the context of that passage where Jesus says that, then immediately afterwards he says, by their fruit you will recognize them. And what I'm hearing from a lot of your answers is you feel you and your congregation produce good fruit.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what we do. That's what we come together to do. And we don't have outreach programs that go out of the church. Like, we don't have things happening at the church where people from the community can come. We empower every single individual to be that outreach in their lives. And so they go back to wherever they live. And we have people that travel 125 kilometers one way every Sunday to be with us. We have a very wide circle. We have people who come from towns north of us and east of us and west of us, and they come to our place. And then they go back to those places, and they do the work of creating right relationship where they are. And I think that's the empowerment that this kind of movement can have.
You did write a book on prayer. So do you pray?
We do as a community. We have a time that's called sharing, and I'm so glad you asked about this, because what we do there is we raise, initially we talk about everyone just from wherever they're sitting, calls out the name of a group or an area in the world that is deeply in need, and we hold those, and then we go into a more intimate time where people speak about things that are going on in their lives, or the lives of people they love, or a deeper insight into some of that challenging stuff that's going on in the world. And that is a time of joy and of sorrow. And then at the end, again, as the first section, we have people just call out those names of individuals and organizations that, you know, use the image of the wall, and they have their shoulders up against that wall of you know, intolerance or violence or hatred or climate issues, and who are making a difference in that world. And while I was on leave many years ago, and they changed the word to community sharing time. It used to be community prayer time, but it was changed. But I often, when I'm speaking publicly, I talk about that as the prayer that I have more often than not seen answered. And I use Jerome Stone's wording, situationally transcendent resources. In a situation, I may not have access. I may not know what I can do. I may not be able to find solid ground beneath my feet. But together in that group, we will have resources, whether they're simply the arms of compassion, or whether they are the name of a physician, or whether they are a space that someone can go to for a retreat. We will name those in this space. And after, you know, when someone stands up talking about a niece that's struggling with, you know, addiction or something, we'll see 3 or 4 people go over there to that person because they have intimate familiarity with that situation, and that will lift up and make whole. And so I often say I've seen that prayer answered in our community. I have seen prayer answered far more frequently than I have seen it answered anywhere else.
So who do you lift those prayers up to then, or it's more a community thing then? You're not praying to a being, but just voicing concerns so people can act? Is that the thought?
There would be people in the community who are definitely praying to a being.
Okay,
As I said before,
right.
There's there's a wide range of people in our space. But more, I think we would speak about as praying into the power that exists within that community. My understanding of God being that power that we create when we live in right relationships. So if you and I create respect and tolerance and love between us, doesn't matter where I am on the planet, I can draw on that power, right? I can draw on the power of that. If you're dead, I can still draw on that power, right? Because it galvanizes in me those values that I want to live out. So it's not an otherworldly supernatural thing, but it is a very real power that we share in that space, and we draw on that power when we leave that space. So it is without that power, without the courage and the strength and the possibility that power charges us with, as well as the being convicted by that power when we have done, when we have broken from our values, and we do that all the time. We have to compromise the values that we have. We trade them off against each other. And one place being, generous with someone who is in need at the cost of our own health, that we may have to trade off that value. So we fail, and we lament those failures, but we live in right relationship to the best of our abilities, and so we are edified and we are convicted by what it is that happens in that time.
Well, the other day, yourself and the Toronto Conference of the United Church of Canada and your congregation, you came to a resolution, and you will be able to continue as an ordained minister in the United Church of Canada. What do you hope the future looks like in the next year and the next few years for you and your congregation then?
Well, we are very much getting excited about not having this cloud over our heads, and we're going to have a cake and dancing on Sunday, that's for sure. And then we will be doing the work that needs to be done. We have, when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission completed its work around the Indigenous history and our needing to own that and make a way forward, we read each of their calls to action every Sunday, and we read them for 94 weeks until we had read them all, and then had a ceremony to acknowledge that. And we continue, there's a group in the congregation that continues its work to advocate for those calls to action and make sure that we respond to them. But we started about 3 weeks ago with another set of calls to action, and these are calls to action related to climate change and ways that we can act that will help draw carbon out of the atmosphere. And the two biggest things are, not two biggest things, but the biggest thing is eating for the planet, and the largest producer of climate change gases is the meat industry. So we have a significant number of vegans and vegetarians in our community. And just like the call to action last week was mentioned, the unbelievable amount of carbon that is produced by people in lineups at Tim Hortons, right? It's unbelievable. And so we'll be advocating for change there. So we'll continue to do that kind of work, and because that's the work that needs to be done. We need to honor and respect the life that we have as a gift on this planet, and consider what the life for children already born is going to be, because of our flagrant disrespect for the balance of nature and its ecosystems. There's so much to be done there. So that will be one of our focal points going forward. And building right relationship with our denomination.
Yes, I imagine you have
things like that.
some repair to do there and coming back together and stuff now. So
absolutely.
And that is one thing I will pray for you over the next week or so, at least while you're on top of my mind, right? And
thank you so much.
I know some people will probably be hoping that they wanted me to challenge you. That was not my intent, though. I just wanted to let you speak and answer questions that we're all asking, and people can come to their own conclusions now that we've heard directly from you. I really appreciate you taking the time.
And I do my best to try to respond on Facebook or by email if people want to be in touch with me. As long as we are committed to respect, I'm happy to respond.